Be sure to follow me on Amish social media. In this fourth installment of the Kicking Away the Ladder series, we cover the war against the middle class. Aristotle says that republics are inherently middle-class societies because only the middle class believes in the rule of law. The rich, says Aristotle, don't think that the law should apply to them, and the poor are indifferent to it. Only the middle class believes in such a system, so without a middle class, you can't have a republic. For the old aristocracy, the rise of the middle class was a traumatic experience. After the Industrial Revolution, such wealth was generated that a middle class emerged. As a result, power shifted as the people now cumulatively had more money than the old land baron class. Consequently, monarchies fell and were replaced across the West with constitutional republics. In his 1899 book, Anticipations, H.G. Wells, who was the darling of England's ruling class a century ago, spoke openly about how destabilizing the rise of the middle class was. He wrote, "The old upper class as a functional member of the state is being effaced. And I have also suggested that the old lower class, the broad necessary base of the social pyramid, the uneducated, inadaptable peasants and laborers is, with the development of toil-saving machinery, dwindling and crumbling down bit by bit towards the abyss. But side by side with these two processes is a third process of still profounder significance, and that is the reconstruction and the vast proliferation of what constituted the middle class." Wells openly ingratiated himself to the oligarchs of his day and begged for a re-establishment of aristocratic rule. Wells said that to sap the power of the middle class, a graduated income tax might be instituted. With their wealth gone, their political structures and cultural influence would collapse, and republics would dissolve to be replaced with the historical norm, feudal states with a tiny ruling class and a giant serf class. Why this is all interesting to understand is that according to recent media cycles, the top 1% officially now have more money than the whole middle class. In the article, we read, "The latest data from the Federal Reserve shows that the top 1% has more wealth than the middle 60% of the income distribution." Most of our history has been a history of the people versus the oligarchs. In the Middle Ages, the land barons realized that if they combined forces, they had more money and soldiers than the king. As a result, they began to threaten the monarch, such as in the case of King John in England, when the aristocrats took him to a clearing in the woods, put a knife up to his throat, and made him sign Magna Carta, transferring all legislative power from the throne to the land barons. This was the creation of the House of Lords in England. To protect himself, the king triangulated around the aristocrats and made an appeal to the people. "Join me," he said, "and we can both unite against the oligarchs." Back in the Middle Ages, most peasants lived on the land barons' farms, working as sharecroppers. They pulled double duty, working as both farmers and soldiers, should the lord go to war with one of his neighbors or the king. To increase his tax base and to deplete the oligarch stock of soldiers, the king created what he called free cities and invited peasants to live there. Instead of paying taxes to the land barons, they paid taxes to the king. By this method, a mutually beneficial conspiracy took place between the people and the monarch against the aristocrats. Both Adam Smith in 1776 and Alexis de Tocqueville in 1835 write about this little talked about aspect of history and political science. So what's been happening since at least the late 19th century is a plan on the behalf of the oligarchical class to reclaim their lost power and dominance. Part of that plan entails, as we mentioned before, a graduated income tax to siphon away the wealth of the average people. But another method is what we now call socialism and entitlement programs. People have long registered confusion as to why oligarchs in Silicon Valley and Wall Street are promoting universal basic income. Conservatives and Republicans often register perplexity as to why these beneficiaries of capitalism are suddenly big fans of entitlement programs and socialism. There is no contradiction once you understand that just as the king once called upon the peasants to aid him in the war against the aristocrats, so now the aristocrats are calling upon the poor in their war against the middle class. One of their critical weaknesses was their small numbers. As a result of this Achilles heel, they seemed powerless to fight the middle class and collapse the republic. But now, through the lure of socialism, they can recruit a mercenary army to sick on the middle class people. This is why many in corporate America suddenly ditched conservatives and pivoted over to violent anarchist groups, with Wall Street funding goon squads. They've also trained young and impressionable people to call for higher income taxes across the board under the pretext of social justice. The oligarchical class know full well that the income tax will not affect them, since they don't generate their wealth from wages, but rather through capital gains. So any new income tax increase will decimate the middle class. The oligarchs, in turn, are promising the new mercenary class freebies, if only they mete out violence and continue the destabilization of the republic. So while populist movements are a result of the king recruiting the productive class to fight the land barons, what we've been calling socialism is an alignment between the unproductive welfare class and the oligarchical class in an axis against the middle class. Remember when Silicon Valley and their confederates in the media kept referring to Trump as a tyrant? They were technically correct. In ancient Greece, a tyrant was not a dictator or autocrat. A tyrant, in its original definition, was a man from the aristocracy who betrayed his own class by calling on the help of the people. This is precisely what Trump did, just as the King of England did in the Middle Ages, and this is why the oligarchs wanted Trump removed from power. He was never their target. He was just standing in the way. You were their target. Our freedoms are under attack, and yet the loss of freedom is not inevitable. America can be saved, and an informed citizenry can and will make the difference. Join us weekly for episodes of Beyond the Cover, and check out our print magazine too at thenewamerican.com.